One day, oceanographer Tom set out with his wife Julia and their 2 children, Casey and Ben. After a long stretch of work with no breaks, he finally got the chance to enjoy the national holiday vacation. They rented a yacht and headed out to sea to celebrate, and at last, he found time to enjoy his favorite hobby, fishing. Tom used the years of experience he gained during his service in the Air Force and taught his son Ben how to fish properly. Maybe it was beginner's luck, but Ben quickly caught a fish. Tom felt a sense of relief and happiness, and he quietly stepped into the cabin without anyone noticing that the yacht's compass was spinning strangely. Meanwhile, Julia had jumped off the yacht because she loved swimming and enjoyed the feeling of freedom while floating on the sea surface. But soon, she felt something was off. At first, she thought it was just waves, but over time she became uneasy when a strange current suddenly appeared and began pushing her away from the yacht. The yacht was now more than 100 meters away from her, and Julia didn't realize something was seriously wrong until she felt real danger. She swam quickly toward the yacht, but the current was strong and kept pushing her away instead of letting her get closer. She began screaming for her family on board, but Casey was wearing headphones and couldn't hear anything. Fortunately, Tom noticed something was wrong. When he looked for his wife, he saw she was on the verge of drowning. He immediately steered the yacht toward her, jumped into the water, and rescued her. The incident confused the family, and after Julia explained what happened, they realized there were strong ocean currents in the area that could make swimming extremely dangerous. Later that night, they celebrated their son Ben's birthday, and the atmosphere was filled with joy. At the same time, Casey's laptop rang with a video call from her boyfriend. She answered right away. He told her about a strange celestial phenomenon happening where he was, multicolored lightning appearing in the sky, something that only occurs once every 1,000 years. He invited her to watch it. They exchanged a few loving words, but the call suddenly dropped, leaving Casey confused. She reassured herself that he was probably just busy and that the lightning might simply mean rain was coming. Suddenly, the yacht began shaking violently. As Casey was about to close her laptop, the whole family gathered on deck and saw a large group of whales passing by. They were shocked by the unusual sight and the number of whales so close to the shore. Then one of the whales passed under the yacht and struck it hard. For the whale, it was just a minor bump, but for the family it was a disaster. The yacht's engine broke down completely, leaving them stranded in the middle of the sea. They tried contacting the coast rescue team, but Julia discovered there was no signal in that area. The family was overwhelmed with despair, realizing they had to figure out how to survive on their own. Fortunately, the whale wasn't aggressive and seemed to be avoiding them. Tom had no choice but to fix the damage himself. He put on diving gear and jumped into the water beneath the yacht. After some effort, he managed to repair the problem, but he injured his arm in the process. The yacht started working again, but then they saw something even more shocking, a fireball falling from the sky. At first, they thought it was a meteor. However, it didn't cause the expected impact, and there were no violent shocks on the yacht. The family became suspicious, especially when another fireball appeared, heading toward them at high speed. They felt hopeless, thinking there was no way to escape even at full speed. But after waiting in fear, nothing happened. When they looked closer, they realized the fireballs were not meteors at all, they were satellites. During re-entry, they had deviated slightly and struck the yacht before falling into the sea, which luckily saved their lives. Still, a new question arose: why did the satellites suddenly fall? Was this a natural accident or something else entirely? Later, they discovered that the yacht itself had suffered additional damage while running at full speed, and it broke down again. With the yacht completely immobilized, the family had no choice but to wait quietly. With no further disturbances, they eventually fell into a deep sleep, exhausted. When they woke up, they were shocked by what they saw in front of them. They had been moved from the vast ocean to a completely barren desert. The family tried to connect the events, but the most important thing now was figuring out where they were. They took out a compass, but it was spinning rapidly even though it wasn't broken. This meant there was likely a disturbance in the local magnetic field. At that moment, Tom was surprised to find two large sea creatures on his shoulder. When he got closer, he realized his son Ben had brought them, using what he had learned from his father's deep-sea fishing experience. These creatures normally lived at depths of at least 500 meters below sea level. They were not supposed to exist in a desert at all. But not only was their presence impossible, they were also active and alive in front of them, which made Tom suspect something was seriously wrong. The family now found themselves in a barren desert with no way to search for information. Their urgent priority was to contact the rescue team as quickly as possible, but they didn't know the area well, so they avoided acting recklessly. Tom decided to take a risk. He brought the yacht's battery to power the radio and call for help, but he wasn't sure if there would be any signal in such a remote area. After a long wait, they finally heard a voice on the radio, which made everyone excited. They immediately called for help, but what happened next shocked them. It was a single voice, and it was also asking for help. The voice introduced itself as Glenn, a deep-sea explorer. He said that the water had suddenly receded the night before, like an extreme tide, and he was now trapped with his specialized equipment on the ocean floor at a certain depth. From this message and the earlier compass issue, Tom realized the problem was magnetic. Their location hadn't actually changed. The water had simply disappeared from beneath them and moved elsewhere. However, this information wasn't very helpful, especially with strange aerial phenomena appearing in the sea, and the family losing hope of pinpointing their exact location. The last place they considered safe was before Julia's drowning incident, and they were about 500 miles from shore. Later, both sides exchanged more information and learned that Glenn had been injured during the retreat of the tide, but fortunately Julia, being a doctor, was able to treat him. Glenn then shared his location, and Tom found it on the map. He was about 200 meters away from them. After comparing all the data, they decided the best option was to go to Glenn's location, especially based on Tom's assumption that the water would eventually return. Their damaged yacht was no longer a safe shelter, while Glenn's specialized deep-sea equipment could better withstand the harsh conditions. The family quickly gathered their belongings from the yacht and took some defensive tools before heading toward Glenn's marked location. There, they found a man with a dog, and from his appearance, it was clear he was another victim of the situation. Tom approached him kindly and asked if he needed help, offering him a bottle of water. But the man shocked them by suddenly attacking Tom after drinking it, taking advantage of their lack of readiness, and stabbing him with a fishing spear, killing him. Julia was horrified and immediately thought only of escape. The yacht was the closest option, but the man didn't give her any chance and threw his spear at her. Fortunately, she dodged in time, but it still hit her shoulder. The man was extremely determined and chased after Julia. She told Ben and Casey to hide quickly, grabbed a kitchen knife, and prepared to fight back. The man entered the yacht and found no one at first, while Julia had crawled through an internal opening and planned to attack him from behind. But reality was harsher than she expected. The man was not alone, he had a dog with him. The dog sensed Julia before she could approach, and she realized her life was in immediate danger. Her adrenaline surged, and she managed to kill the dog with the knife, but she did not escape unharmed. The sounds of the fight alerted the man inside the yacht, who was far more experienced and cunning. Instead of attacking immediately, he pretended not to notice anything. When Julia got closer, he suddenly lunged at her and grabbed her neck tightly, causing her face to turn red as she struggled to breathe and was seconds away from death. However, the man did not know that the two children were still hiding inside the yacht. Casey pulled out a flare gun and, taking advantage of his distraction, fired it. The man immediately released Julia, and the burning flare set fire to the materials inside the yacht, giving them a critical chance to escape. Julia fled quickly with her children. Once the yacht disappeared from sight, they finally managed to catch their breath. Julia tended to her wounds and checked their remaining supplies, which would only last 3 days, barely enough for a 200-meter journey. Their greatest loss was the death of her husband, Tom. The family was devastated, but they had no time to grieve, as they didn't know when the water would return. Without shelter, they could suffer the same fate. So they decided to return again to find Glenn. After a short rest, they didn't realize that the man had not died in the fire and was still alive, quietly following them from a distance. As night began to fall, Julia and her children kept walking all day and decided to find a place to rest. There was a nearby airplane wreck, which seemed like a good spot to stay for the night. However, this also gave the mysterious man another opportunity to attack. When the night grew deep and silent, Casey, Julia's daughter, went outside for a moment without realizing that the mysterious man was waiting for a chance nearby. He saw her leaving the wreck and quietly moved toward her, preparing for a deadly attack. But just as he reached her, Julia suddenly appeared from a hidden corner. It turned out everything had been a trap for him. Julia had already realized earlier that he was following them during the day. This time, she understood his tactics and waited for him, while pretending not to notice anything, just like the situation when he killed her husband. This time, Julia showed no mercy. She attacked him with a knife and killed him brutally. But even then, her anger wasn't fully released, and she continued striking him until she made sure he was completely dead. The next morning, the family was shocked by what they saw. The body of the mysterious man they had killed the night before had been reduced to a skeleton, eaten overnight by small swarms of spider-like insects. It was something completely unnatural. Julia suspected there were more hidden dangers in the desert, and that other threats were still waiting for them. So the three of them quickly continued their journey, no longer being followed, but the horrifying image of what had happened stayed in their minds. However, the brief calm didn't last long. As the sun was about to set again, they prepared to rest when they suddenly noticed a large group of strange creatures approaching from a distance. They couldn't see them clearly, but the danger was obvious, so they stayed alert. Suddenly, they ran for their lives, driven by adrenaline, while the creatures seemed to be focused entirely on them. After running for a long time, Julia and her children saw a cargo ship standing still ahead. There were survivors outside the ship, so they approached them immediately to ask about the strange creatures. But as soon as the survivors saw the shadows in the distance, they rushed inside shipping containers and locked themselves in without hesitation, which confused Julia and her family. Realizing how serious the situation was, Julia and her children also decided to hide inside the containers. However, the survivors were unlucky. There was a gap that allowed a large number of those creatures to crawl inside. The survivors tried to fight back with all their strength, but it was useless. They were completely consumed by the creatures. After that, the creatures lost interest in Julia's group, as if they had already found enough prey. When the sun rose again, the creatures had completely disappeared. After some rest, the family continued their search for Glenn. During that time, they used the radio to contact him and learned that the creatures were called spider locusts. They lived in cracks in underwater rocks, which may have been why they survived the tidal changes and extreme conditions. These creatures were now the most dangerous threat in the region. The three of them quickened their pace after learning this information, trying to reach Glenn before the sun set for the third time. But things didn't go smoothly. After half a day of walking, they reached a point near Glenn's location, but they still had to cross an underwater fissure, exactly the nest of the spider locusts. They were trapped. If they moved forward, death awaited them. If they stayed, death would also come. So they had no choice but to cross the valley. Fortunately, the creatures were asleep after feeding on the unlucky victims earlier. The three of them moved carefully for a long distance, but suddenly a collapse occurred above the valley. Julia quickly pushed her children aside as huge rocks fell. However, she became trapped on the other side due to the noise, which woke the spider locusts. If nothing unexpected had happened, Julia would have died. But her children refused to give up. They climbed over the rubble and managed to pull her out just before the creatures reached her. After this terrifying escape, the three of them finally reached Glenn's location. But what they saw was even worse than they expected. Glenn was severely injured and close to death. The spider locusts were still chasing them, and in the end, they could do nothing but watch as Glenn was attacked by the creatures. Julia and her children survived, but they couldn't escape the horrific scene they had witnessed. They entered Glenn's equipment, and had no choice but to close their eyes and surrender to fate. Fortunately, The equipment was made of a special alloy, meaning that even if they were swept away by a tsunami, they would not die at sea. In the end, when they came out, they found themselves in the middle of a city, or rather, the ruins of a destroyed city. And that was the end of the movie. Thank you for watching, and don't forget that your opinion matters. Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel.